Deep in the Andromeda sector, where three dying stars cast perpetual twilight across 17 habitable worlds, sits the Intergalactic Military Academy on Kepler Station. Here, among gleaming chrome corridors and gravity-defying training facilities, the finest military minds of 47 species gather to learn the art of cooperative warfare. The Academy's motto, carved in 17 different scripts above the main entrance, proudly declares, "Unity through understanding, strength through diversity." What it doesn't mention, perhaps wisely, is that their interpretation of understanding involves a concerning amount of physical violence, and their definition of strength requires someone getting knocked unconscious at least twice per training cycle. The Academy operates under what its founders optimistically termed the Universal Combat Doctrine, a pedagogical masterpiece that combines the worst aspects of military hazing with the intellectual rigor of a bar fight. The doctrine's central tenet holds that true combat readiness can only be achieved through direct physical experience, specifically the experience of being on the receiving end of various species' natural weapons. Nothing teaches respect for a Vorthan's acidic spit, quite like having your carapace partially dissolved, the thinking goes. Similarly, one truly appreciates the crushing power of a Goliathan's grip only after having several ribs cracked in a friendly demonstration. Commander Vex Thul, standing 8 feet tall with an exoskeleton that could deflect small caliber plasma rounds, serves as the Academy's chief advocate for this hands-on approach to education. His chitinous shell bears the scars of countless battles across the spiral arm conflicts, each mark a testament to his survival against species that most academics only read about in xenobiology textbooks. The Krathari's forearms move with mechanical precision, while his compound eyes track multiple targets simultaneously, a biological advantage that makes him nearly impossible to surprise in combat. At least that's what his service record claims, and what he tells anyone within earshot during his frequent lectures on species superiority. Beside him stands instructor Xiphon, a molluscoid whose 12 tentacles writhe in constant motion, occasionally pausing to adjust the various scanning devices attached to his translucent body. Where Commander Vex Tool represents brute force refined through discipline, Xiphon embodies the Academy's pretense towards scientific rigor. He measures impact forces, calculates stress tolerances, and maintains detailed files on each species' pain thresholds, all in the name of optimizing training outcomes. His voice carries the wet, bubbling quality typical of his species, but his words ring with the authority of someone who's convinced that statistical analysis justifies whatever happens on the training mats. The Academy's latest addition to this distinguished faculty represents Earth's first formal contribution to galactic military education. The human stands barely 6 feet tall, possessing the typical bipedal configuration, dual-chambered circulatory system, and calcium-based skeletal structure that makes his species so refreshingly straightforward compared to the exotic biology surrounding him. Unlike his instructors, he bears no visible scars, displays no natural armor, and carries no evidence of the genetic modifications that mark career soldiers from more advanced worlds. His uniform fits poorly, suggesting either Earth's textile industry hasn't quite mastered intergalactic sizing standards, or the quartermaster simply assumed all bipeds shared the same proportions. What the human lacks in physical intimidation, he makes up for in an almost supernatural ability to absorb punishment, while maintaining what his psychological profile describes as inappropriate cheerfulness. Previous training sessions have established his species' remarkable capacity for recovering from injuries that would permanently disable members of more specialized races. This resilience, combined with Earth's apparent eagerness to participate in galactic affairs, makes humans ideal subjects for the Academy's more vigorous teaching methods. The philosophy underlying these methods stretches back to the Academy's founding, when the first generation of instructors faced the challenge of training species whose evolutionary paths had never crossed. How does one teach a silicon-based crystalline to work alongside a methane-breathing nebula? The answer, according to the Academy's charter, lies in shared suffering. Nothing builds interspecies camaraderie quite like collectively surviving your instructor's idea of character development. This approach has produced some of the galaxy's most effective military units, though critics note that survivor bias might skew the statistics. Those who wash out of the program rarely file complaints, partly because Academy graduates tend to occupy positions of considerable authority throughout the galactic military hierarchy, and partly because many of the washouts require extensive medical reconstruction before they can operate communication devices again. The morning training session begins with the ritual gathering in Combat Base 7, where the artificial gravity has been adjusted to galactic standard, and the floor maps have been thoroughly sanitized following yesterday's unfortunate incident with the Trilithian cadets' defensive secretions. 43 cadets, representing 22 species, arrange themselves in the traditional observation semicircle, their various appendages, sensory organs, and breathing apparatus creating a tableau that would fascinate xenobiologists and terrify civilian populations in equal measure. Commander Vextool surveys the assembled group with the satisfied air of a predator evaluating a buffet selection. His compound eyes glitter under the bay's harsh lighting as he begins his customary pre-demonstration lecture. Combat effectiveness, he announces, his voice carrying the metallic overtones that make Krathari's speech sound like grinding machinery, cannot be learnt from data streams or simulation pods. True warrior instinct emerges only through direct confrontation with superior force. The alien cadets nod in apparent agreement, though several species lack the necessary neck structure to perform this gesture properly. A hexapodal cadet's eye stalks sway approvingly, while a crystalline's faceted surface reflects the bay's lights in patterns that roughly translate to enthusiastic concurrence. They've all been through this routine before, watching their fellow cadets serve as living demonstration aids while absorbing valuable lessons about their place in the galactic military hierarchy. Today's lesson, Commander Vextool continues, his forearms spreading wide in a gesture that showcases the natural weapons built into his forearms, concerns the proper application of measured force against structurally inferior opponents. His gaze settles on the human cadet, who has somehow managed to position himself directly in the commander's line of sight, despite the relatively crowded training space. Either he possesses remarkably poor spatial awareness, or he's volunteering for whatever educational beating the commander has planned. The human's expression reveals nothing beyond polite attention, the kind of look one might wear while listening to a slightly boring lecture on agricultural statistics. His posture suggests relaxation, rather than the coiled tension that marks experienced fighters, and his hands hang loose at his sides in a way that would make any competent warrior instructor wince. Clearly, Earth's military training programs have some significant gaps in their curriculum. You, Commander Vextool declares, one armored finger pointing directly at the human. Center mat, standard defensive position. The instruction carries no malice, merely the casual authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. Around the semicircle, other cadets shift slightly to improve their viewing angles, knowing from experience that educational demonstrations provide valuable insights into both combat techniques and species durability limits. Instructor Xiphon's tentacles dance across his scanning equipment, calibrating sensors to record impact data and biological responses. Subject exhibits baseline human physiological parameters, he reports in his distinctive bubbling voice. Adrenaline levels remain within normal ranges, suggesting either exceptional emotional control or insufficient understanding of current situation. The human moves to the center mat with the unhurried gait of someone taking a casual stroll, apparently unaware that he's about to serve as a practical demonstration of why humans rank somewhere near the bottom of most galactic combat effectiveness charts. He assumes what might charitably be called a defensive stance, though his form would make any proper martial arts instructor weep. His feet are too close together, his center of gravity too high, and his guard too loose to deflect anything more dangerous than harsh language. Commander Vextool approaches with the measured pace of a professional instructor, his movements precise and controlled. The key to effective force application, he explains to the watching cadets, lies in understanding your opponent's structural limitations. Observe. Without further warning, he delivers what he considers a light demonstration strike, a casual backhand powered by approximately 3 tons of hydraulic muscle pressure, aimed at the human solar plexus. The impact produces a sound like a bass drum struck with a sledgehammer, followed immediately by the distinctly human noise of all air being forcibly expelled from someone's lungs. The human cadet lifts off the mat, travels approximately 15 feet through the Academy's artificial atmosphere, and lands in a remarkably undignified heap near the bay's emergency medical station. The trajectory would have been quite impressive if it were intentional. For several seconds, the only sound in Combat Bay 7 comes from the human's labored attempts to remember how breathing works. Commander Vextool nods with satisfaction, his compound eyes tracking the cadet's slow, painful return to consciousness. Note the human's recovery pattern, he instructs the assembled observers. Despite obvious structural damage, the subject maintains basic motor functions. This resilience makes humans valuable assets for high-casualty operations. Around the semicircle, alien cadets exchange what pass for knowing looks among species that communicate through everything from bioluminescent patterns to pheromone releases. The hexapodal cadet's eye stalks bob in appreciation of the commander's technique, while a pair of gossamer twins create harmonized tones that roughly translate to applause. They'd all witnessed similar demonstrations, and they understand the lesson being taught. Know your place in the hierarchy, respect superior force, and try not to bleed on the training mats. The human, meanwhile, has managed to regain both consciousness and a mostly upright position, though his movements suggest that several internal components may have shifted during his brief flight. He stands swaying slightly, one hand pressed against what civilians would call his stomach, and military medics would classify as the impact site for blunt force trauma. His expression has evolved from polite attention to something resembling mild confusion, as if he's trying to remember whether he left his quarters' environmental controls on the wrong setting. "My apologies, sir," the human manages, his voice carrying the slightly strangled quality that typically follows emergency decompression. "I seem to have misunderstood the exercise parameters." His stance remains remarkably stable, considering the recent violent interruption to his internal architecture, and his eyes maintain focus despite what medical scanners would undoubtedly classify as a significant concussion. Commander Vextool's mandibles click in what might be amusement. "The exercise parameters were precisely as intended, Cadet. Your role was to demonstrate structural failure under controlled force application. You have performed adequately." The human cadet's response to this educational beatdown proves far more interesting than his initial performance suggested. Rather than displaying the resentment or defiance that typically follows such demonstrations, he adopts an expression of what appears to be genuine contrition. His shoulders slump in a gesture of submission that translates clearly across species lines, and his voice carries the appropriate tone of someone who has learned an important lesson about his place in the galactic order. "Thank you for the correction, sir," he says, each word carefully enunciated despite the obvious difficulty his respiratory system is having with basic oxygen processing. "I clearly underestimated the gap between human combat capabilities and proper military standards." The admission draws approving murmurs from several alien cadets, who recognize the wisdom of accepting one's limitations, rather than fighting against biological reality. Commander Vextool's compound eyes glitter with satisfaction as he turns to address the wider group. "Observe the subject's rapid adaptation to new information," he announces, his voice carrying the pedagogical authority of someone who has spent decades refining his teaching methods through practical application. Effective military units require personnel who can acknowledge tactical disadvantages without allowing emotion to compromise operational effectiveness. Around the training mat, alien cadets nod in various approximations of agreement. A Trilithian's gill slits flutter in what might be appreciation, while a Goliathan's massive head bobs once in recognition of the lesson being demonstrated. They understand the commander's point. Successful military cooperation requires each species to recognize its natural role in the hierarchy. From the Crithari's obvious physical dominance down to humanity's apparent function as expendable infantry, Instructor Xiphon's tentacles dance across his scanning equipment, recording biological data with the enthusiasm of a researcher who has stumbled across an unexpected experimental result. "Fascinating," he bubbles, his voice carrying notes of scientific curiosity that would concern anyone familiar with molluscoid research methods. Human stress hormones have normalized despite significant physical trauma. Either the species possesses remarkable emotional regulation, or the subject is experiencing delayed shock response. The human cadet remains in his submissive posture, hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that presents no threat, while simultaneously highlighting his species' lack of natural defensive adaptations. "Sir, if I may ask," he addresses Commander Vextool with appropriate deference, "would it be possible to understand more about proper force application? I believe my training may have provided insufficient preparation for galactic military standards." This request draws what might be described as pleased reactions from the assembled instructors. Commander Vextool's mandibles click approvingly, while Instructor Xiphon's bioluminescent patches pulse in patterns that suggest intellectual satisfaction. Here stands a cadet who not only accepts correction, but actively seeks additional instruction, demonstrating the kind of attitude that builds effective military units across species lines. An excellent question, Commander Vexthal replies, moving closer to the human with the confident stride of someone whose authority has just been properly acknowledged. Military effectiveness requires understanding the full spectrum of force application, from minimal intimidation to maximum structural disruption. He begins pacing around the human cadet, his four arms gesturing to illustrate various combat principles while his audience listens with rapt attention. I would teach all classes of this kind of war. The brigade listens with rapt attention. The commander launches into what becomes an extended lecture on comparative species combat capabilities, complete with statistical analysis of bite forces, crushing pressures, and toxic secretion potentials. His voice carries the authority of someone who has personally tested many of these capabilities in actual combat situations, while his movements demonstrate various attack patterns that have proven effective against different biological configurations. The Krathari combat advantage, he explains, stopping directly in front of the human cadet, derives from optimal skeletal density, redundant muscular systems, and natural armor plating evolved through millions of years of predator-prey dynamics. His exoskeleton gleams under the training bay's lights, each plate a testament to evolutionary perfection, refined through countless generations of survivors. Other alien cadets absorb this information with the focused attention of students who understand that today's lecture might determine tomorrow's survival rates. The hexapodal cadet's eye stalks track the commander's movements, while simultaneously monitoring the human's reactions, gathering data that will inform future tactical decisions. Meanwhile, the crystalline's faceted surface reflects and refracts the scene into thousands of slightly different perspectives, each one adding to its species' collective understanding of interspecies combat dynamics. Throughout this extended exposition, the human maintains his posture of respectful attention, occasionally nodding at particularly significant points while keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. His breathing has returned to something approaching normal, though careful observers might notice that his stance has shifted almost imperceptibly, his weight now distributed more evenly across both feet, in a configuration that suggests better balance than his earlier positioning. "Sir," the human interjects during a brief pause in the commander's lecture, "would it be appropriate to request a practical demonstration of these principles? I believe direct experience might help me better understand the concepts you've explained." His tone carries exactly the right mixture of humility and eagerness that instructors hope to hear from promising cadets. Commander Vexthal's compound eyes focus on the human with renewed interest. "You wish to serve as demonstration subject again?" The question carries a note of surprise, since most species require considerable recovery time between educational beatings. "Your species' pain tolerance may be higher than initial assessments indicated." The human's expression remains earnestly respectful as he responds, "I believe proper military training requires pushing past comfort zones, sir. If understanding these combat principles might help me serve more effectively, then personal discomfort seems irrelevant." His words draw approving murmurs from alien observers who recognize the dedication of someone willing to sacrifice immediate comfort for long-term operational effectiveness. "Very well," Commander Vexthal declares, his mandibles clicking with what might be approval. "Position yourself for a standard combat demonstration. This time, I will demonstrate precision striking techniques rather than general force application." He begins moving into an attack stance that showcases several millennia of evolutionary refinement, his forearms positioning themselves to deliver maximum impact while maintaining perfect balance. The human assumes what appears to be another woefully inadequate defensive position, though something in his posture suggests he might be paying closer attention to stance mechanics than his relaxed expression indicates. "Sir, before we begin," he says, his voice carrying just enough uncertainty to sound appropriately deferential, "would it be possible to attempt a response? I understand I'm unlikely to succeed, but the experience might be educational." Around the training mat, alien cadets exchange glances that roughly translate to amusement across multiple sensory spectrums. The idea of a human mounting any kind of effective response against a Krathari warrior strikes them as charmingly naive, like watching a small prey animal challenge an apex predator to single combat. Still, they appreciate the human spirit, even if his tactics seem fundamentally unsound. Commander Vexthal considers this request with the patient demeanor of an instructor who has seen countless cadets learn harsh lessons about their limitations. "One response attempt will be permitted," he agrees, his tone suggesting magnanimous condescension. Consider it part of your education in realistic tactical assessment. What happens next unfolds with the kind of mechanical precision that would impress chronometer manufacturers and horrify medical personnel in roughly equal measure. The human's transformation from apparently submissive cadet to combat-effective organism occurs in the space between one heartbeat and the next, so quickly that most observers initially assume they've witnessed some form of equipment malfunction rather than deliberate human action. The movement begins with what appears to be a stumble, the human's supposedly poor balance finally betraying him as Commander Vexthal launches his carefully measured demonstration strike. But instead of falling backward in defeat, the human drops into a crouch that brings him well below the Crothari's extended arm, while simultaneously pivoting on his left foot in a maneuver that generates torque through his entire skeletal structure. His right fist, previously hanging loose and unthreatening, suddenly accelerates upward with the focused energy of compressed springs being released all at once. The punch that follows represents approximately 4 billion years of evolutionary refinement in pursuit of one specific goal: the efficient transfer of kinetic energy from one biological system to another. Every muscle fiber in the human's frame contributes to the impact, from his planted foot through his rotating hips, across his torso, and finally through his shoulder into an arm that has suddenly discovered exactly where Commander Vextul's neural cluster resides, beneath all that impressive armor plating. The sound of impact differs markedly from the earlier demonstration's bass drum effect. This noise carries higher frequencies, suggesting harder contact between surfaces that weren't designed to meet at such velocities. Commander Vexthul's compound eyes have just enough time to register complete surprise before his consciousness decides that dealing with current circumstances exceeds its operational parameters, and simply shuts down to avoid processing further data. 8 feet of genetically perfected warrior architecture collapses like a controlled demolition, each segment folding in sequence as various autonomic systems attempt to maintain basic life support while higher brain functions take an unscheduled vacation. The commander's forearms spread wide as he falls, his exoskeleton producing a series of metallic clanks that echo throughout Combat Bay 7, like applause from a very enthusiastic percussion section. The silence that follows this educational reversal stretches long enough for several alien cadets to question whether their various sensory organs are functioning properly. Compound eyes, heat sensors, electromagnetic detectors, and pheromone analyzers all report the same impossible result. The human is standing over Commander Vextul's unconscious form, flexing his fingers as if checking for structural damage, while the Crothari combat instructor remains motionless on the training mat. Instructor Xiphon's tentacles writhe in patterns that suggest his equipment may be experiencing some form of systemic failure. Sensors indicate successful neural cluster disruption via blunt force trauma, he reports, his bubbling voice carrying undertones of scientific fascination mixed with professional concern. Impact velocity measured approximately 47 meters per second at contact point, generating sufficient pressure to temporarily interrupt Crothari neural pathways. The human straightens slowly, his movements once again displaying that deceptive casualness that had marked his earlier performance. "I apologize if I exceeded appropriate response parameters, sir," he addressed the stunned instructor, his tone maintaining the same respectful deference he had shown throughout the session. "I may have misunderstood the tactical demonstration guidelines. Around the training mat, 42 alien cadets process this development through whatever cognitive mechanisms their species employ for updating fundamental assumptions about reality." The hexapodal cadet's eye stalks weave in complex patterns that suggest deep philosophical contemplation, while a pair of Gossamer twins produced harmonized tones that roughly translate to confused admiration. Several species begin recalculating their internal assessments of human combat potential, adjusting numbers that had previously ranked somewhere between negligible and entirely theoretical. Emergency medical personnel arrive with the efficiency that marks any organization where unconscious instructors represent a relatively common occupational hazard. They swarm around Commander Vexthul's motionless form, deploying scanning equipment and neural stimulators while maintaining the professional demeanor of beings who have seen similar situations before, though perhaps not involving quite this particular species combination. The lead medic, ethereal whose translucent form flickers with diagnostic patterns, completes a preliminary scan before addressing the assembled group. "Subject exhibits standard neural cluster disruption consistent with precise impact trauma," she announces, her voice carrying the detached authority of someone delivering routine medical assessments. Recovery time estimated between 27 and 43 minutes, depending on individual neurological resilience factors. During this medical intervention, the human cadet maintains his position near the center mat, hands clasped behind his back, in a posture that somehow manages to suggest both respectful attention and readiness for whatever happens next. His breathing has returned to normal, and his stance displays none of the instability that had marked his earlier performance, as if the previous apparent weakness had been nothing more than temporary equipment malfunction. The instructor Xiphon approaches the human with obvious caution, his tentacles adjusting scanning devices to gather additional data on this suddenly interesting specimen. Previous assessments may have contained significant analytical errors, he admits, his scientific curiosity apparently overriding any concern about professional reputation. Human combat capabilities appear to exceed standard galactic baseline measurements by considerable margins. The human's response carries the same tone of polite cooperation that had characterized his earlier interactions. I believe there may have been some miscommunication regarding species capabilities, sir. Earth military training emphasizes adaptability and tactical patience rather than immediate force projection. His explanation suggests that what had appeared to be submission might actually have been reconnaissance, and what had looked like weakness might have been deliberate misdirection. As Commander Vexul's eyes gradually flicker back to consciousness, assisted by medical stimulators and the kind of pharmaceutical intervention that makes modern galactic medicine possible, he finds himself staring up at a human face that wears an expression of genuine concern. "Are you feeling better, sir?" the cadet asks, his voice carrying the appropriate level of respectful worry for a superior officer's well-being. The commander's mandibles work silently for several seconds, as his higher brain functions come back online and begin processing recent events. His compound eyes focus on the human with something approaching wariness, the kind of look that predators develop when they realize their prey might have been studying them as intently as they've been studying it. Medical personnel complete their assessment and begin packing their equipment, satisfied that no permanent damage has occurred to either participant in this educational exchange. The lead medic pauses to address Instructor Xiphon before departing. "Recommend revision of species combat assessment protocols," she suggests, her flickering form already beginning to fade toward transparency. "Current human classification may require significant upward adjustment." As normal training bay operations slowly resume, with alien cadets returning to their various exercises while casting occasional glances toward the center mat, Academy administrators hastily convene emergency meetings to discuss the implications of recent events. Within hours, new policy directives emerge regarding species-appropriate demonstration methods, instructor safety protocols, and the inadvisability of using humans as examples of structural inferiority. The irony, lost on no one except possibly the aliens involved, is that Commander Vexul's educational demonstration succeeded perfectly. He had intended to prove a point about superior force and species hierarchy, and he had indeed made his point quite clearly. The human cadet, in response, had simply made his own point, with greater precision and considerably more lasting impact on Academy policy. In the end, both instructor and student learned valuable lessons about assumptions, tactical assessment, and the dangers of underestimating opponents based on preliminary observations. The galaxy's military academies, meanwhile, began incorporating new training modules on human combat capabilities. Though recruitment officers noted a curious reluctance among qualified instructors to volunteer for demonstration duties involving Earth's representatives, the human cadet, for his part, continued his training with the same respectful attitude and apparent eagerness to learn, though his fellow cadets began treating him with noticeably more professional courtesy. After all, anyone capable of dropping a Krathari combat instructor with a single punch clearly deserved a certain level of respect, regardless of their species' theoretical position in the galactic hierarchy. And somewhere in the Academy's administrative offices, policy analysts worked late into the station's artificial night, revising assessment protocols and wondering whether humanity's entry into galactic military service might require more comprehensive preparation than anyone had originally anticipated. The following morning brought a series of developments that would have amused observers with a taste for bureaucratic irony. Commander Vexul submitted his first sick leave request in 17 years of service, citing what medical records diplomatically described as stress neural fatigue. His replacement, a notably smaller Krathari instructor, instituted new policies requiring advanced medical clearance before any physical demonstrations involving human participants. Meanwhile, recruitment applications from Earth experienced an unexpected surge, with the Academy's admissions office reporting a 300% increase in human candidates expressing interest in advanced combat instruction. The Galactic Military's Personnel Department, reading between the lines of these applications, began drafting recruitment guidelines that emphasized humanity's newfound reputation for tactical unpredictability and asymmetric response capabilities. The human cadet himself seemed blissfully unaware of the administrative chaos his educational moment had generated. He continued attending classes, participating in exercises, and maintaining the same respectfully enthusiastic demeanor that had initially marked him as an ideal demonstration subject. His fellow cadets, however, had developed a curious tendency to volunteer for training exercises whenever he was selected for participation, apparently eager to observe more examples of human tactical adaptation techniques. Perhaps most tellingly, the Academy's gift shop began selling t-shirts featuring a silhouette of a bipedal figure standing over a much larger prone form, with the caption, "I survived advanced species interaction training." The items proved remarkably popular among graduates, though sales records indicated that Crithari personnel showed a distinct preference for the alternative design, featuring only the Academy's traditional motto,